started to develop an act, and you know, and it was I knew that I was kind of going to be a lifer.
That was comedian Arthur Gaus. I'm Jeff, and this is Storied San Francisco. In this podcast, Arthur picks up where he left off in part 1. To set the stage for his entry to the comedy world, Arthur tells us all about the phenomenal San Francisco comedy scene of the 1980s and early 90s. He got his start doing stand-up at open mic nights around the city and in Santa Cruz, where he went to college. He worked his way up to a breakthrough at Cobs, but Arthur also spends time telling us all about the magic of the Punchline. Right at the onset of the pandemic, he released Nice Jokes for Smart People, which you can find on just about any streaming service. Arthur ends this episode sharing his hopes for whatever's next here in San Francisco. Be sure to check back next week, when our guest will be former mayoral candidate and current-day public defender and artist, Matt Gonzalez. Here's Arthur.
I'd done the plays at St. Ignatius too, but that was like my first real stage experience, and like it didn't take long for me to figure out that this was totally for me.
Okay, but stage obviously is one thing, comedy is a subset. So where did that come from?
So, in the 80s, stand-up was huge in San Francisco.
Right.
Huge. Like, you could make a living as a stand-up in San Francisco if you were sufficiently good. Like, you could, like, Will Durst, you know, he made a living being a comic in San Francisco in the 80s.
Right.
And, or like he rose to stardom in the 80s. And he, you know, and he's, you know, Will has more or less been, you know, to the extent that I've ever had a mentor in comedy, it's Will, you know, and he can talk about this 80s comedy boom. It's just like endlessly. It was such a thing. There were clubs everywhere. You could drive out to Walnut Creek. You know, you could start your night, the early show at Walnut Creek, and just kind of like hit shows on your way in until you ended up at Cobs or the Punchline in downtown San Francisco.
Wow.
And it was and so many great comics came out of it. I mean, Whoopi Goldberg came out of it. Robin Williams came out of it, you know. Greg Proops, Patton Oswalt for a time was here. Margaret Cho, like all of these people came out of this boom. And as a result of the excitement that it generated, there was this TV show called Comedy Tonight on PBS. Right? It was like on KQED. It was called Comedy Tonight. They did a bunch of shows from the Punchline. I don't know if they always did it from the Punchline, but I definitely remember that there were some shows taped at the Punchline. But it was just like stand-ups. And it was like, from what I could tell, mostly local stand-ups. And but it was huge. It was a big deal. And I remember watching it as a kid and being like, that looks awesome. That looks so cool.
Yeah. What do you just think it was coincidence that, you know, there were, or like, what do you think explains? Because my understanding in the US, it's New York, Chicago, LA, right? Those are the big kind of comedy hubs. What do you think explains this phenomenon in the 80s?
Yeah. So it's kind of like, here's kind of the way that I think about it. And I think that it's true. I think it's also true in fine arts. My wife is a painter, and she said she was taught this at art school about San Francisco. And I think it's really true, and it applies to comedy as well. And that is, like, stuff gets made in San Francisco, packaged in LA, and sold to New York.
Right.
And, you know, Chicago's kind of it's a great city, but its stock in trade is improv. And there's a lot of stand-up in New York because the networks are there. There's a lot of stand-up in LA because the networks are there.
Right.
But like, why San Francisco? And my own opinion, and I think that this is based on conversations I've had with Will and, you know, other people who've been around for a long time, is that there's kind of always been a place for stand-up in San Francisco. It was like Phyllis Diller was out here. Lenny Bruce famously he would come here to get arrested, basically.
Right.
There was a connection between stand-up and like the big rock promotions of yesteryear, like Bill Graham.
Mm-hmm.
Like the Punchline now is what it used to be, the green room of a Bill Graham rock venue.
Right.
So there was this connection between like the big rock stars of the San Francisco sound and the comics.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's just like, why would it be San Francisco? I just think that like, the beats in North Beach, like the live poetry thing is, and the hippies, like the kind of hippie Renaissance fair vibe and like the beat poetry vibe. It's like stand up kind of fits in that spectrum in a way that like makes sense to people,
Totally.
I don't have a better way to explain it than that, but it's always been here. It's always been good here.
Oh yeah.
You can always, I mean, this San Francisco produces good comics just like it's like we can't stop. It's like a conveyor belt here. Like we just keep turning out good comics. And so, I just think it's a place where after a while it earned a reputation as a place where you could go to get really good. And it's still a place where if you're really serious about being a stand-up and you come here, you can get really good just by working the San Francisco and Bay Area shows, because the audiences are smart and they're there to see stand-up comedy. They're not just there to get drunk and eat nachos,
Right. But how kind of fortunate were you that this thing that happened in the 80s?
Oh,
Right? Would you say that was like your kind of calling, your big inspiration, or?
yeah. Well, it was certainly, I saw them doing it and said, this looks cool. And the other cafe which was like a big comedy spot during the boom, was near my house. And I never went into it, but like I knew that it was there and I knew that people thought it was really cool,
What's that place called?
It's called Crepes on Coal.
Okay.
But back in the day, it was called the Other Cafe. And
Okay.
if you take the N Judah back when, like, in the future when writing the N is like allowed again,
Mm-hmm.
when you come out of the tunnel at Carl and Cole, if you look up, there's a marquee and it says the Other Cafe Comedy Nightly.
Got it. So now let's go back. So it's like, were you still in high school? Had you graduated when you decided
I
to
think I had graduated.
just plunge? Okay. Was it like the summer after you graduated? Like
Yeah, I think
what's
it was
going
like,
on in your life when you were like, that looks fucking awesome. I'm gonna try it.
well, I don't know. I think I somehow figured out. I don't know how I know. Maybe it was like, maybe I read it in the Weekly or the Guardian or the Chronicle or something. And it was like, but I figured out that it was that at this place, I don't know what it's called now, but there's still a coffee shop there, but it was called the One World Cafe back in, year 2000 or whatever.
Okay.
And I went to the One World Cafe and I did a set at an open mic. There was a Friday night open mic there. And then they told me like, oh, you can go and double up. You can do another set at this place called the Java Source on 6th and Clement.
Okay.
And that place was like mostly illegal gambling and some coffee.
Is that the one next to Neck of the Woods?
It's near
It's
Neck
like
of the Woods.
Scarlet Lounge now, maybe.
Yeah, I don't know what it is now, but back then it was like a lot of obviously like card games for money.
Yes.
like
Right.
money on the table card games, and like a lot of people drinking really strong coffee. And in the back there was a stage and there was a Friday late show at the Java Source.
Okay.
Open mic and atrocious.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so, but anyway, this is like, it's the year 2000, so the internet is kind of just getting going. And then after a couple of times doing the Friday double dip, somebody gave me something back then. It was called the list. And like, there was like a paper list and people would just hand out copies of the list. And there was, it was, who was making the list back then? is Tony Sparks, who's still like it's like he's your entry point for the world of comedy in San Francisco. Like you must go through Tony Sparks in order to get
Okay.
anywhere. And he ran basically all of the open mics in the city, all of them. And
Got
he's
it.
the nicest guy, and he is like the most supportive dude for comics that there is, especially new comics. He's an amazing guy. But
Rad.
he it's like he would give you the list, and it would say whether a show was an open mic or whether it was booked ahead of time. And I just followed the open mic thing because I was 18, and like people were already looking at me sideways because I was 18 and I looked about 13.
Yeah.
And yeah, and I couldn't do any of the bar shows. So it was like for the first 2 years I was doing like open mics in coffee shops and like getting, I mean, I coffee shops and art galleries, and I got good pretty fast. I was obsessed with like never wanting to do the same set twice, which was like a really like a very early rookie move, is like that I
Yeah.
would never recommend. But
Yeah.
like as a result, I was generating like tons of material,
So much material.
and I didn't have much to do other than that. I was going to school at UC Santa Cruz, and so I was just like heading back up on the weekends and just hitting these open mics, and
Did you like it, Arthur?
I was obsessed with it.
Okay. Right
I was
away, you
obsessed
liked it.
with it instantly. I knew
Okay.
it, and I knew it was going to be. I knew, and all my friends knew. It was like the moment I started doing it, it was like off we go. Like
Yeah.
I never. It's like I started to develop an act, and and it was. I knew that I was kind of going to be a lifer, like really
Okay.
fast. Yeah.
Shit. So, something pretty close to every weekend coming back from Santa Cruz.
Oh my god. Like, well, and there was like every I've never been out of San Francisco for more than 6 weeks.
Whoa.
And so it was like almost every weekend. And there was like I started to be able to pick up some work in Sunnyvale at Rooster T. Feathers, which is a comedy club, and then like I was starting to get some work in San Jose. And then I was starting to like kind of I was at UCSC, and I was starting to get I was trying to produce my own shows there. All I was trying to do is get a set up any chance I could. Like
Right.
I didn't care what it was. Like if there was a microphone, I was putting the set up,
And not just the weekends anymore.
Yeah, it was all the time.
Okay.
And yeah, it's like the liking it or not liking it sort of didn't enter my brain until later. It was just like I did it and I had to do it again. I had to do it again. I had to do it again.
Yeah, that's probably the kind of thing that adults think of. Whereas at the time, you're just like, "This is what I'm doing," and it just took over.
Yeah, I remember I have this one of the really clear memories I have about my like sort of relationship with stand up at the time was like somebody gave me Warriors tickets, and like I was all excited to go, and like free Warrior, and I mean it was the era of the terrible Warriors, and like
Right.
I went out there to Oakland, and I like sat down in my seat, and I looked up at the clock, and it was like 7:45, and I realized that in 15 minutes like this just like ghastly open mic at the One World Cafe was about to start, and I felt this like deep sense of dread that like I
FOMO.
wasn't there at this
Yeah.
terrible, god awful open mic. And that's when I sort of realized that like I kind of had like really warped the space-time continuum here,
Yeah, like maybe I have a problem.
Yeah, that was
Yeah.
that it was something that like that this was like bigger than just like a hobby,
Yeah. So take us through. This is you got started in 2000. What are some of the highlights of the last 20 years?
Well, let's see. Well, I can just kind of keep going in chronological order. So at Santa Cruz, I started getting paid work by about my second year of Santa Cruz,
Oh
and
wow.
like little paid work.
Mhm.
Like I started to get in like the comedy lingua of the time, they would call them showcases, and it was
Okay.
like you got booked ahead of time to be on somebody's show. Now I think you would just call them a bar show, but back then they would call them a showcase, right? Oh, you got booked
Sounds
for a show.
sounds fancy.
Yeah, it sounds fancier, right? And and I was like, and so I started getting booked for those, and getting paid, and then so I was driving up and down from Santa Cruz to start, and then I started getting some club work, and then I like finished second, I think, in like one of the competitions around here,
Mm-hmm.
and then it was like, and this was like probably my second or third year doing stand up, and then it was like as soon as I got back after school, I was doing I was I was at the Punchline every Sunday I could be there. I was working I never said no to a gig. Like, probably just a few months after I graduated college, I got my first big week at Cobs, which was
Awesome.
which was like, that was a big, big, big deal to me.
Were you opening there for like uh, a touring comedian or?
Yeah, it was the first week I did at Cobs. I was opening the week for Ed Helms.
Awesome.
I don't remember who was the middle act, but um, but it was Ed Helms was the headliner, and and I was the host, and I had a great week. They said, oh, Cobb's is a really hard room to work. The management at the time they said, oh, they're tough. None of it turned out to be true. I wound up like getting along great with the management, having great sets, and it was, and then it was like, then it really picked up for me in a way that I found like quite satisfying,
Awesome.
Yeah.
Cobb's is, I love Cobb's, but it's correct me if I'm wrong. It's like a triangular room, right?
It's a cavern,
Right. It's
and
enormous, and
it's enormous.
on a slant or something.
Yeah.
Because
And
it's on Columbus. It's like, which is a slant.
yeah. And
Yeah.
it's like it's a little bit funny shaped, and you kind of there's like an art to learning how to work that room, because
Mm-hmm.
you kind of I mean, this is true for almost every room, but you have to work back to front at Cobb's. You have to really make sure that the back of the room can hear you and understand you and is with you, because they'll if the back of the room is with you, then it'll work its way forward. But then you have to manage the sides of the room too, because there's this big cavern at stage right, and like you have to really work that stage right because of the shape of the room. But
Because
if
they're
you
like a
forget
football field away.
yeah, it's like if you forget about stage left, then stage right will quit on you because of the way the room they'll feel like you're not paying attention, and then
Right.
you always have to work back to front. So you're always talking to the back of the room, but then you're checking in on the left and you're checking in on the right, and it's like it requires some real focus.
Mm-hmm. I mean,
Punchline, yeah,
I was
go
just
ahead.
gonna, yeah, please talk about Punchline. I just in general, I'm gonna be one of those annoying people during the pandemic. That is one of the things I miss the most is comedy.
Oh my, yeah, you've
Look who I'm talking to.
who do
No,
you
but
think you're
honestly,
talking to, man?
but
I
honestly,
just spent half an hour telling you about how it's like about how I'm basically an adrenaline junkie for it. And
right.
then you're like, oh yeah, I miss going to comedy shows. I'm like, dog, do you have any idea what I would do to get 5 minutes in a bowling alley right now?
Oh
Um,
man.
no, so here's the thing. Back in the day, like it was a little bit. It mattered when I broke in. It mattered a little bit, or at least I think to comics, it mattered whether you broke in at Punchline or Cobs. And I broke in at Cobs, and a lot of people broke in at Punchline.
Right.
So it was like I kind of had to break in twice. I had to break in at Cobs, then I had to break in at Punchline.
Okay.
But like Punchline is like the thing that I always tell people about the Punchline is like just like go any night because it's great. But
Right.
like if you're really trying to get down, if you're really trying to see something cool, and unexpected and just kind of spontaneous, and like what stand up really is like just do yourself a favor and go on a Sunday night sometime, like on a 3-day weekend where you don't have to be at work in the morning or whatever. Just find a Sunday to go, because that's the San Francisco night, and it's like they put up like 10, basically local acts, and then like frequently someone famous drops in and closes.
Mm-hmm.
But most of the time what you're seeing is like the rotation comics at the Punchline and Cobs. Um and in the audience, the place will be full, but it'll be like, 100 audience members and like 50 to 75 comics,
Yeah.
because everybody's trying to get up at Punchline. And
Yeah.
and like the way that you get up is you sit there and you wait your turn. And it's
Right.
been like that for 40 years. And so like it's always full, and it's like half people who just want to go see comedy on a Sunday night, half people who are trying to get up at the club. And like it makes for a really interesting comedy audience, because the audience that's there is like they're comedy hardcores. Like that's what
Right.
they're into, is stand-up comedy.
They
And
want to
the
be there.
comics, and the comics, that's what they're into too, but they're just seeing it from a different perspective.
Mm-hmm.
So if you kill on a Sunday at the Punchline, it's like you're making audience members laugh and you're making comics laugh, which is like the hardest thing to do.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
and so there's like it gives a certain energy to those shows. And so I always tell people, like, look, go see the big headliner shows. They're worth the money. It's great. Absolutely do it. But like you are, if you live in San Francisco and you like comedy, you would be neglecting like yourself if you didn't, once or twice a year, just go peep the Sunday show, because it's really special and they've been doing it for a long time.
And they're gonna be back, right?
Yeah, dude.
Yeah. Okay.
Like, you're tripping, man. They're gonna be back.
Awesome. Am I crazy? Did you put out a record or something like that? A recording?
Yeah, I did an
Recently? Okay.
album. I recorded it literally a year ago.
Okay. And then nothing happened. So no. Yeah.
Yeah.
What's going on with that? And how can people find it?
So they can find it on any streaming service. To answer that question, it's on Spotify, Pandora, all of it. Apple Music. I don't know if it's on Tidal, but maybe it is. But it's called Nice Jokes for Smart People. It's about we recorded it like a year ago today.
Oh,
And it's 45 minutes, and it's on all the streaming services. I think it's really funny. I mean, well, here's the thing. I think it's really funny. I also like spent 6 months of a pandemic editing it. So like I hate the sound of my own voice, and all I can see is the flaws.
right.
But I like the people who have listened to it, they seem to think it's good. So I'll believe them.
Okay.
And yeah, it's called Nice Jokes for Smart People, available everywhere.
Awesome. I can't wait to hear it. Can I have you end by talking? I think it's on the minds of a lot of people. It's on my mind, certainly. Is like maybe we're just starting to see the cracks of the end of this shit.
Mm-hmm.
What are your feelings on San Francisco of the near future?
I care very deeply about the city, and I love it very much. And I obviously I found a lot of what happened over the last 15 to 20 years to be extremely offensive. There's something about the way there's something about about how much money came here so fast, so suddenly, and the people it displaced, and like what greater purpose was it serving? Well, it wasn't serving any greater purposes. It turns out that many of these internet companies are basically like Exxon, but instead of pumping oil out of the ground, it's like filling your brain with like disinformation,
Right.
and like pretending that they're making the world a better place. You know what I
Of
mean?
course.
Like that's the most offensive thing about it, is that
Yeah.
like at least Chevron Oil has the decency to be like, look, we are pumping oil out of the ground. What is your problem, right? It's like there's something about like all of this make the world a better place crap that was just the really, really, really offensive to me. And so but like, what do I think about like the future of San Francisco? Well,
Or what are your hopes? Where do you see it going? Where do you want it to go?
well, I hope they're booking stand-up shows. Uh, here's what I want. I wish people. Here's one thing that I think about from my childhood in San Francisco that I think people don't understand if they didn't grow up here. Is that when I grew up here, there's always been the same amount of space in San Francisco.
Right.
It's always been 7x7, right? You can only fit so many people here.
Mm-hmm.
And so as a consequence, no matter how rich you are, you're never that far geographically from somebody who's poor.
Right.
And no matter how poor you are, you're never very far geographically from somebody who's rich.
Mm-hmm.
And there's something about the way the recent spate of richness that is sort of like about excluding people and keeping like putting up these sort of like making sure the rich people are all siloed in their rich land and the poor people are all siloed in their poor land,
Mm-hmm.
and that there's no intermixing. And like when I was a kid here, you couldn't avoid the fact that there were going to be people different from you nearby, no matter where you were.
Mm-hmm.
And what that produced, I think, for people is an understanding that to the extent that you're in a better situation than somebody else, it's because you are very, very fortunate and almost no other reason.
Right.
And to the extent that there's somebody that you're worse off than somebody, then like, you know, it's not really a reflection on you, you know, personally, because, you know, it could be anybody out there.
Right.
And just being in contact with people who are different from you is a very valuable and enriching experience. And it's one that I hope doesn't get lost. And as the city rebuilds, like, or comes out of this and reopens and like, you know, wipes the cobwebs out of his eyes, I hope that people look around and see the people who are still here, you know, who made it out, who didn't flee. I hope that the people who are still here all recognize that we've all been through something extremely unique together. And we might have all been in our apartments or in our homes or whatever, but we all had the same, we all had a common experience. And so, you know, I would just really, really hope that, I mean, we're a city that rebuilt after the whole thing fell down and then burned, you know.
Mm-hmm.
We're a city that, you know, like, you know, there was another earthquake and then we lost the World Series, which that was a tough year, you know.
Right.
So like, you know, we've been through some stuff together, and this is just another thing that we've been through together. But I think that I hope that people can realize that there's no way that any reopening or rebuilding or coming out of this pandemic is going to function at all unless we sort of chart a path of, you know, openness and inclusivity and, you know, compassion and, you know, in some ways forgiveness. So I don't know what that means. I don't know how it plays out as a practical matter. But I hope those are the principles that guide it. And I hope they're booking comedy shows.
That was Arthur Gaus. Next week on Storied San Francisco, get to know Matt Gonzalez.
Music for the podcast was produced, performed, and curated by Otis MacDonald. Original photography is by Michelle Kilfeather. Aaron Lim of Bitch Talk Podcast is our contributing producer. The show is produced and hosted by me, Jeff Hunt. Now in our 4th season, we have nearly 150 episodes available on our website, storiedsf.com, or wherever you listen to podcasts. If you can, subscribe, rate, and review our show so that we can reach even more folks. And if you'd like to drop us an old-fashioned email, we'd love it. The address is storiedsf@gmail.com. Thanks for listening. Stay safe, stay strong, stay healthy, and we'll see you next time.
This podcast is a proud member of the BFF.FM podcast network. Learn more at podcast.bff.fm.
BFF.FM, best frequencies forever.